There are moments in life we don't realize are the last, until they've already passed. For Robert Hayes, that morning felt like any other. 6:15 a.m., coffee in hand, catching the same train to the same office he'd worked in for 27 years. His life was predictable, quiet, shadowed by the loss of his wife and the distance from his daughter. But that day, the train was nearly empty. Across from him, a young woman with a notebook smiled. "Everyone has a story. Want to share yours?" Robert chuckled. "My story? Nothing special. I'm just a man who once had a dream and let it go." She wrote something down, then said, "Maybe you just haven't started yet. 27 years isn't wasted. You've just been collecting stories to tell." Her words stuck with him. That night, for the first time in years, he started writing. Life never truly closes its doors. Sometimes, all it takes is a stranger on a train to remind us that it's never too late to begin again. Have you ever had a dream you let go of? Robert Hayes did. For 27 years, his life was a routine: work, home, repeat. After his wife passed away and his daughter moved across the country, his world felt predictable, quiet, and a little empty. One rainy morning, he was late for his train. On that nearly empty car, a young writer sat across from him and asked a simple question: "Want to share your story?" Robert laughed, saying it was nothing special, just the story of a man who once dreamed of being a writer. The young woman smiled. 27 years isn't wasted," she said. "You've just been collecting stories to tell." Those words sparked something. That night, Robert started writing. He wrote about love, loss, and lonely mornings. It was never about becoming a bestseller. It was about finding himself again. Because sometimes, all it takes is a single conversation to remind us that it's never too late to begin again. Soft piano music begins. With the gentle sound of early morning rain, there are moments in life we don't realize are the last, until they've already passed. For Robert Hayes, that morning felt just like any other. 6:15 a.m. He stepped out of his small apartment on the outskirts of Chicago, a warm coffee cup in his hands, ready to catch the morning train to work. Robert had worked in the same office for 27 years. It was a stable job, predictable, but it was never one that made him feel truly alive. His wife, Linda, had passed away 5 years earlier after a long, difficult battle. Their only daughter, Sophie, was living in Seattle now. They didn't speak as often as they should, not out of anger, but because neither of them quite knew how to bridge the quiet distance that had grown between them. Sound of a train moving along the tracks, a gentle, rhythmic, slightly melancholic tone. That particular morning, Robert was running a bit late. The train car was nearly empty, occupied by just a handful of early risers. He found a seat by the window, watching as the city's sky slowly shifted from a flat, pre-dawn gray to a pale, hopeful gold. Across the aisle from him sat a young woman with warm brown hair. Her head bent as she scribbled something into a notebook. She suddenly looked up, her eyes meeting his, and offered a small, friendly smile. "Heading to work?" she asked, her voice clear and bright. Robert managed to smile back. "Yeah," he replied, his voice a little rusty from the morning quiet. "Same as every day." She nodded, seeming to understand. "I'm writing an article for a magazine," she explained, gesturing with her pen. "It's about the people who take the morning train. Everyone has a story. Would you want to share yours?" Robert let out a soft chuckle. "My story? Oh, it's nothing special. I'm just a man who once had a dream, and then, somewhere along the way, I let it go." Her curiosity was piqued. What dream was that? He hesitated for a moment, the memory feeling like a distant echo. "Writing," he finally admitted. "I wanted to be a writer once." Soft, nostalgic piano music rises slightly in the background. The young woman wrote something down in her notebook, then looked at him with a thoughtful expression. "Maybe you just haven't started yet," she said quietly. 27 years isn't wasted time. You've just been collecting the stories you were meant to tell." Robert turned to look out the window again. Just then, the morning sun finally broke through the heavy clouds, casting long, golden rays across the landscape. Her words resonated deep within him, echoing in his mind long after he got off the train and sat down at his desk. They stayed with him all day. That night, for the first time in years, Robert didn't switch on the television. Instead, he walked over to a dusty bookshelf, pulled out an old, forgotten notebook, and wrote on the very first page, "The Last Morning Train" by Robert Hayes. And then, he began to write. He wrote about his life, about Linda, about the lonely mornings and the quiet evenings. He wrote about hope, about loss, and about the pieces of himself he thought were gone forever. The music shifts, becoming warmer, more inspiring in tone. A month passed. Robert started waking up earlier each morning, not just to catch the train, but to pour a few more pages of his story onto the paper. He felt a forgotten spark flicker back to life. One morning, as he was making his coffee, his phone buzzed with a text message. It was from his daughter, Sophie. He blinked in surprise as he read her words. "Dad, I read your story online. It's beautiful." He was stunned. It turned out the young woman from the train was a freelance journalist. She had submitted his story, his words, to an online magazine. It was published under the title, "It's Never Too Late to Begin." The story began to circulate. People at the office started talking to Robert, really talking to him, for the first time in years. One of his coworkers pulled him aside and said, "You know, I used to play the guitar. Your story, maybe I should start again." Robert just smiled. His life hadn't magically transformed overnight, but something fundamental inside him had shifted. It was as if a small, warm light had been switched on in a room that had been dark for far too long. A gentle, hopeful melody begins to play one Saturday morning. Robert arrived at the train station earlier than usual. He was holding a brand new notebook, its pages filled with the stories he had written since their meeting. He wanted to give it to her as a thank you, but she wasn't on the platform. She wasn't on the train. He asked the conductor, a familiar face, if he'd seen her. The conductor's expression turned somber. He told Robert that the young woman had been in a serious car accident and was in the hospital. Robert froze, his heart sinking as he clutched the notebook tightly in his hands. That afternoon, he found her hospital room and went to see her. She looked pale and tired, but she smiled weakly when she saw him standing in the doorway. "I didn't think that story would touch so many people," she whispered, her voice fragile. Robert stepped forward and gently handed her the notebook he brought. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You helped me find the part of myself I'd completely forgotten." The music swells, reaching an emotional high point. She opened the notebook and read the title on the first page aloud. "The Last Morning Train." A soft smile touched her lips. "It's a beautiful name," she said softly, "but I don't think there's really such a thing as a last train. There are only people who decide not to get on." The music slows, the melody becoming tender and reflective. A year later, Robert Hayes published his first book. It didn't become a bestseller or make him famous, but it became something far more important. It became his truth, shared with the world. At the small book signing he held at a local shop, a familiar face appeared in the crowd. It was Sophie. She walked up to him and hugged him tighter than she had in years. "I'm so proud of you, Dad," she whispered. The music fades into a gentle, warm, and hopeful piano melody. Life never truly closes its doors on us. Sometimes all it takes is a slower train, a single sentence from a kind stranger, or an unexpected moment to remind us of who we were always meant to be. Because it's never, ever too late to begin again. Thank you so much for watching. If this story touched you, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more content that inspires. We'll see you next time.